The Archdiocese of New Orleans. The story of the faith in this region began with the labors of zealous missionary priests, was sustained and nurtured by dedicated religious groups like the Ursuline Sisters, and carries on today under the leadership of its current apostle, Archbishop Aymond.
I see ministry now as planting seeds, and we plant seeds in the hearts of people. We plant seeds in the society and in the values of the society, and we do our best to water those seeds, to allow God to water those seeds.
This is the story of the bishops of America, the shepherds of the past and the shepherds of today, who through their callings and ministry carry the church into the future. It's also the story of their parish, their church, the cathedral. This is The Chair, an exploration of what it means to be an apostle in America. On the banks of the Mississippi River, just south of Lake Pontchartrain, is the city of New Orleans, sea city of the Archdiocese of New Orleans, one of the oldest Catholic communities in the United States.
First of all, it's a relatively large diocese. It's very complex. It has a history, and it's the second oldest diocese in the country. From the very beginning, we were many, many different cultures coming together.
Someone once remarked, everyone in New Orleans is Catholic. Perhaps this is a bit of an exaggeration, but I think it really speaks to the understanding of the rich history between Catholicism and the culture of New Orleans. They're one and the same. You really cannot separate them out when we just look at not only the history of the city, but the way the city continues to thrive and grow.
The Archdiocese of New Orleans has a tremendously long and rich history, dating all the way back to the era of French colonial settlement, when missionary priests and nuns came to the region to minister to the French settlers, but also to work to convert the native people, traveling up the Mississippi River throughout central portions of the United States in order to bring the gospel to the new land.
Women religious have played an important role in the contribution to Catholic Louisiana. In 1727, the Ursulines arrived and opened Ursuline Academy, which has the distinction of being both the oldest continuously operated school for girls, as well as the oldest Catholic school in the United States.
The diocese was formally established in 1793 as the Diocese of Louisiana and the Floridas at a time when the territory was under Spanish authority.
Originally, our bishop was either in Quebec when we were under French rule or in Havana, Cuba, when we were under Spanish rule. When the church opened after the fire in 1794, that roughly coincides with when the Diocese of Louisiana and the Floridas was created. And picture something like the Louisiana Purchase, this huge swath of land spreading from Florida all the way up to the Canadian border. More than 50 dioceses have been carved out of that original Diocese of Louisiana and the Floridas.
During the War of 1812, the women of the city went to the convent to pray with the Ursuline sisters in front of a statue of the Blessed Mother as the enemy was advancing. To this day, an annual Mass is celebrated in thanksgiving to Our Lady's intercession in protecting the city during the battle.
New Orleans suffered these yellow fever epidemics that were spread by mosquitoes. There's a church on Rampart Street, St. Jude's Shrine now, St. Our Lady of Guadalupe. That church was originally built as a funeral church right outside the rampart of the city. They didn't even bother to put pews in the church because it was just funeral from the 1,200 people that would die each week. So it was really a big part of the city.
In 1850, New Orleans is elected as an archdiocese, with Anton Blanc being its first archbishop. It was an extraordinary time of growth in the city of New Orleans. He invites the Jesuits, the Redemptorists, and the Christian Brothers into the city. He wants to establish convents and schools for girls, so he invites the Sisters of Charity, the Sisters of Notre Dame, the Good Shepherd Sisters, and other congregations as well. These religious communities really support Bishop Blanc in as many ways as they possibly can in order to help deepen, expand, and grow the Catholic community in New Orleans.
Bishop Janssens oversaw a new era of growth in the diocese in the late 19th century. He was also a very able administrator and worked to Americanize the church at a time when the Diocese of New Orleans still held a very French feel. Well into the 20th century, the Archdiocese of New Orleans still used French as the official language.
As part of Bishop Janssens' Americanization efforts, he worked to establish the diocese as separate independent corporations, which was very different from the earlier model that saw parishes as the product of French royal authority. During his time period, he also recognized that the character of his flock was changing dramatically and worked to meet the needs of new communities within his midst. He corresponded with Mother Cabrini and invited her sisters to come and work with the Italian population. He also reached out to Mother Catherine Drexel, who used her wealth to fund missionary outreach to Native Americans and African Americans. And he recognized the need for greater assistance to work with the Black community in the post-Civil War years.
One of the important educational institutions in the Archdiocese of New Orleans is Xavier University. This was founded by St. Catherine Drexel in the early 20th century as a school dedicated to serving the Black Catholic community. Unlike other dioceses in the United States, where Black Catholics were a minority and were often out of sight and out of mind, Black Catholics in the Archdiocese of New Orleans were always a clear and constant presence and a vibrant part of the life of the church.
Among those who worshipped at the Cathedral Parish was Henriette Delille, who was the founder of the Sisters of the Holy Family, one of the two historically Black communities of women religious. At a time when many other religious communities would not accept Black vocations, Delille, a free woman of color and a faithful Catholic, established her own sisterhood to ensure that the needs of the Black Catholic community were met. Her sisters were pioneers in the work of education and social welfare programs in the Archdiocese.
During the 20th century, as the struggle for racial equality increased in the United States and in the Archdiocese of New Orleans, its leaders confronted the legacy of racism with courage. One of the key figures in reshaping the Archdiocese of New Orleans was Archbishop Joseph Rummel, who led the diocese from the 1930s until the mid-1960s. Bishop Rummel led the diocese through a period of post-war expansion, vastly increasing the number of parishes and schools throughout the Archdiocese. But he was also a champion of social justice, and he really led the Archdiocese of New Orleans in the push for desegregation.
And he took an incredibly bold, courageous, and some would say foolish, but it wasn't foolish, it was the work of the Lord, a step to say that all the schools must be integrated. And he went through a lot of protest, on that public protest against him, because he was taking a stance on racism. And he was saying that racism is a sin. It's not what God wants us to do, that all people are created equal. They're all beautiful and sacred in the eyes of God.
He accepted Black candidates for the priesthood to the Archdiocesan Seminary, and in 1953 he issued a pastoral letter, Blessed Are the Peacemakers, that formally moved to desegregate parishes throughout the diocese. The pastoral letter made a clear point that let there be no segregation or discrimination in the pews, just like there will be no segregation in the kingdom of heaven. Those were prophetic words.
In its long history, the Archdiocese and the city of New Orleans have survived fires, invasions, a civil war, epidemics, anti-Catholicism, and various other disasters, both natural and man-made. But it was tested as never before in 2005 by Hurricane Katrina.
I do remember going back to New Orleans, coming back here at Thanksgiving and Christmas and going through the city. And at that time, it was still almost like a ghost town. The street lights weren't working. It was an eerie feeling. So it was a very, very tragic time. Archbishop Hughes was the Archbishop at the time, but what he had to do with the grace of God to try to put the city back together and to heal the wounds of people. And I think there were many people at that time to just say, New Orleans will never, ever again be what it is. Well, that's not true. But within 10 years, the city really has come back very strong. And I think it certainly invited people to a different level of faith, independence upon God.
The gem of the Archdiocese is the Cathedral of Saint Louis, the oldest continually active Roman Catholic cathedral in the United States. Now, facing Jackson Square with its towering center spire, complemented by two smaller spires on each side and a perfectly symmetrical facade, Saint Louis Cathedral is an architectural icon. Viewed from Jackson Square, this is possibly the single visual image most closely associated with New Orleans.
The founder of New Orleans was at the mouth of the river on the day that New Orleans was founded, and he pointed over there, which is here, and said, let's build a church there. And this is the spot where the church was built at the founding of the city. It is the center. It really is. I mean, it's amazing to me.
The first permanent building that was built on the site was in 1727, and that church survived until Good Friday in 1788, when a fire broke out in a private chapel just down Charter Street, which runs in front of the cathedral. One of the stories is that the townspeople came to Father Antoine, Père Antoine, an alley next to the church is named after him, and said, Father, can you please ring the church bells and let everybody know there's a fire? We have to get the bucket brigade together to help put out the fire. And reportedly, according to one account, Père Antoine said, no, today is Good Friday. That's a day of penance and solemnity. Bells are a sign of joy and happiness. You can't ring the bells on Good Friday. Just go door to door to get your bucket brigade. If he said that, he was wrong, and the fire got out of control and burned 80% of the city, including the church. The Ursuline nuns down the street prayed to Our Lady of Prompt Succor, Our Lady of Quick Help, and she came quickly to spare their convent and a few other buildings nearby, but not the church or the rest of the city. A man named Almonaster made a deal with the King of Spain, so Almonaster funded the new church, which was completed and opened in 1794. That building survived until about 1850, when Almonaster's daughter, the Baroness Pentabila, enlarged two apartment buildings on either side of Jackson Square in the heart of New Orleans, putting the old church out of scale. And so in an effort to expand the size of the church, they took out one too many bricks and the side walls collapsed and fell in. So most of the building that survives today is from the 1850 renovation. The foundation and the front lower facade date from the 1793 church. So using that structure, we count 1793 as the date for this cathedral's origins. That makes us the oldest continuously operating cathedral in the United States.
Along the walls of the cathedral, there's a series of images of the life of Saint Louis, King of France. It culminates with an image behind the altar of Saint Louis calling the Seventh Crusade.
You can follow along the life of this saint, who is really a great patron for our city. Every year on his feast day, all the priests and religious of the entire church will read a letter that he wrote to his son about how to be a good ruler, which includes taking care of the poor and the orphans and the least of your subjects. So he's really a model saintly leader and a great patron for our archdiocese.
There's a beautiful image on the ceiling of the church that shows Christ bestowing a crozier or a shepherd's crook upon St. Peter. And that's important because after the resurrection in one of Christ's appearances, he says, Peter, do you love me? And Peter says, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And he repeats 3 times, feed my sheep, tend to my lambs. So Peter is given this authority as a shepherd who cares for the sheep, the flock. And so especially within a cathedral, this imagery is very potent and speaks to us of the shepherd who is the bishop of that diocese.
The baptismal font predates the church that burned in the fire in 1789. And so it's made out of marble, it survived the fire. Just generation after generation of New Orleans has been baptized in that baptismal font. It's a great icon of this Catholic culture here in New Orleans. The cathedra is the Latin term for chair or seat. So this is the seat of the archdiocese, the seat of the bishop. We're very good about respecting the tradition that only the current archbishop sits in that chair. He's the one who is today directly responsible for the souls of the people of this archdiocese.
The cathedra, or chair, inside Saint Louis Cathedral represents Bishop Aymond's authority as the Apostle of New Orleans.
I was born here in New Orleans in what we call the Gentilly area. I have two sisters. One is 14 months younger than I, and the other one is 3 years younger. My mom and dad were also from the area, at least from Louisiana. My dad was originally from the Alexandria area. My mother was from the Lafayette area. My mother was very dedicated to our family and very much a stay-home mom. My dad was a superintendent on the wharfs and the ships coming and going, and that was his work. I was an altar boy at St. James Major Church, became very close to the priests there, and certainly they were important to me as models of what it meant to be a man of faith, but also they instilled in me, in many ways, the desire for priesthood. And I felt very privileged to get to know them well. I did not want to go to the high school seminary, and so I went to Coriezo, as I mentioned, and it continued to be an important part of discernment and question. I didn't know it was discernment at that time. Is that what God was calling me to do? And so it was really after high school that I decided I would go into a seminary college. And then from there, I went to St. Joseph Seminary College. I began seminary work, and then from there, went to Notre Dame Seminary, where I graduated in 1975 and was ordained in 1975. I do distinctly remember the night before I was ordained a priest, particularly. Certainly there was a sense of feeling privileged that, in spite of my weakness, that God would call me. I also remember placing myself in God's hands and saying, if this is what you really want of me, then I do believe you will see me through. I want to be a good steward of the gifts that God gave me. That's always been one of the themes in my life. I have to recognize my gifts and be a good steward of those gifts. I was ordained here as a deacon and as a priest and also as a bishop. If the walls could talk, and they do talk to me at times, it really tells, a definite story of a part of my life. I was director of the Society for the Propagation of the Faith, the mission office for the diocese, and I did that for about 25 years, actually. And it ended up changing my life. It ended up changing my understanding of church. I had the opportunity and the privilege to visit many missionary countries. We also founded at that time a program for medical missionaries, and we would take medical people to be missionaries and to provide services. So that has made a significant difference in my life. And I was in my 30s when I became rector of the seminary. I taught at the high school for a while, then went to the seminary as the director of pastoral formation and the director of administration. Then it was after that I became rector archbishop.
On November 19, 1996, Aymond was appointed auxiliary bishop of New Orleans. A few years later, Aymond was named the 4th bishop of Austin in January of 2001.
The day that I got the call that I was being named a bishop, I was teaching Introduction to Pastoral Theology, and my secretary came to the door, and no one ever came to the classroom when I was teaching. And I looked really strange, like, what are you doing here? And so she called me out, and she says, Archbishop Schulte's on the phone. And I said, tell him I'll call him back. And she said, no. He said, no matter what you're doing, he wanted to talk to you. And he was in Washington with the nuncio at the Bishops' Conference. And he says, I have some news for you. The Apostolic Nuncio is here, but before he talks to you, I want to tell you that the Holy Father has named you a bishop. But, he said, you will stay as rector of the seminary. And I thought to myself, okay, now I'm going to have 2 full-time jobs that I won't be able to accomplish. I was very surprised, very shocked. And I remember when the nuncio got on the phone, I said to him, I'm not sure what to say. And he says, well, certainly you would want to do what the Holy Father asks. Anyway, I said yes. It was a very scary moment. And actually, I was named coadjutor of Austin, and the understanding was that the present bishop would retire in December. It was several months later that I actually became the ordinary of the diocese.
After years of ministry in Austin, Archbishop Aymond received another call from the nuncio in 2009. This time to inform him that he had been named the next Archbishop of New Orleans.
And I remember my response saying, Your Excellency, there are so many difficulties in New Orleans. Katrina was in 2005. This is 2009. He says, put your hands in the hands of the Lord and everything will be okay. Pretty good advice. Put your hands in the hands of the Lord and you will be able to lead his people. When I thought about coming home, well, there are two things that I thought of: the privilege of being home and being able to be the shepherd of the people. I also thought in the scriptures that Jesus said the prophet is never accepted in his own country. But the people here in New Orleans have been overwhelmingly loving and accepting. And I remember in this very place, I was installed as the Archbishop of New Orleans. My coat of arms, first of all, has a prominent section where it's the Ave Maria because of my devotion to Mary, but also because of my time at Notre Dame Seminary, Our Lady Seminary. So she is a part of my life, and certainly Notre Dame Seminary was a part of my life, so that's in my coat of arms. The second thing is a staff, a shepherd's staff, lying down in honor of St. Gregory, who gave his life for the people of God to be Pope and to be the shepherd. And then the other thing that I have is, going back to my missionary work, it's the globe with a cross on it. And so our mission and ministry is to evangelize the world. One of the greatest fears that I had in coming back to New Orleans was knowing, first of all, it's a relatively large diocese. It's very complex. It has a history, and it's the second oldest diocese in the country. And so knowing all that, the complexity, but then I thought to myself, well, all the priests of the diocese, I either knew them as the older priests, or they were classmates, or they were people I taught in the seminary. And I thought to myself, this is going to be very challenging. And I must say that that has not been the case. They have been very welcoming, very cooperative. I think that there really is a sense of fraternity. Yes, my responsibilities are different from theirs, but they have been very supportive. I believe that my main ministry as a bishop is to support the priest and to care for the priests. And then if they are cared for and supported, I'm fulfilling my ministry because they will bring that to God's people. I see ministry now as planting seeds, and we plant seeds in the hearts of people. We plant seeds in the society and in the values of the society, and we do our best to water those seeds, to allow God to water those seeds. My image of priesthood, and even more so of a bishop, is that of the shepherd. And what does a shepherd do? The shepherd protects the flock, he feeds the flock, takes care of the wounded sheep, is always present. And so to me, that image is a very, very powerful image of what it means to be a priest and also to be a bishop.